Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep the Mining podcast. And today's guest is Grant Budge, who's the founder of Integrity Media UK, who are tackling mental health through literature and creative writing. Grant's originally from the coal mining industry here in the UK, and he's going to discuss and talk to us about mental health management within the mining industry, which is obviously an ever-increasing subject, I suppose. A lot of us men don't like talking about mental health, and I think it probably does affect all of us in some shape or form. So obviously wanted to get Grant's expertise. So that's welcome Grant to the podcast. How you doing, Grant?
I'm doing really good. Thank you very much.
That's good to hear. Yeah, so I just wondered if you can, obviously you're originally from the mining industry. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about your career, I suppose from when you did start in the mining industry and how your sort of career has developed to what it is today.
Yeah, sure. So I was probably one of the last mining engineers to graduate from Imperial College, in the ever demising education industry for the mining engineers in the UK. I left there and joined what was the privatised coal industry in the UK. I spent about 8 years there, did some work underground, ended up working in the plant and equipment division for a while, and then latterly got into process engineering, coal preparation, and building new plants for some of the sites we had around the country. There wasn't a good future for coal in the UK. Had to decide what I wanted to do. I was actually married by that point to a very successful chemical engineer. She didn't fancy going off to some of the extremes of the world that mining could take us to. So I jumped industries, ultimately got into the iron and steel industry, which I think quite a number of people in the mining sector can naturally fit into because it's heavy equipment focused. I spent a few years there working in an international capacity for a company called Harsco Environmental. And then from then, I kind of find my passion, which was, first passion, I'll put it that way, clean energy. And I started working for a company that was developing, at the time, what was going to be the leading carbon capture and storage power generation project in Europe. And took that through all the way up through signing off on the information memorandum to take it to financing. I then kind of stuck with that afterwards, and I've been doing consultancy, working for mostly with startup companies, new innovation technologies, helping people trying to bring new techs to market that can have added value either for decarbonizing or sustainability. And then more recently got into this venture, which may seem like a huge pivot to make when you've turned 50, engineer to leading a publishing company. I'm still doing the engineering work, but this piece, I've been an amateur author for over 20 years. And, you mentioned there again about men finding it difficult to talk. I had the problem about 5 years ago, and I had the issue that I couldn't communicate. And I ended up writing my story, which has now been released. And it's after I did that, I just decided, well, this could be actually good for other people. And then I gradually formed that into this idea that it's Integrity Media, and we kicked off a year ago. So now I do this half of my time, and I do clean technology stuff the other half of the time.
Yeah. So I just wondered if you can just give us an overview of Integrity Media and I suppose what you're all about. And then obviously I want to go into some questions around not necessarily your experience, but obviously you're an expert in the field of mental health. So I've got some questions around that, and hopefully that can help people, our listeners that are listening, that may be going through certain situations. So just wondering if you just tell us about the company.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you kind of touched on it. So the idea behind it is we work with authors who have or are suffering, poor mental health challenges, to use creative writing, as a means to navigate that situation. And there's a number of stages in going through mental health challenges. First and foremost is acceptance of where you're at, which a lot of people do struggle with. When you're actually suffering, mental health, there can be a lot of noise in your head, and it's hard to articulate thoughts. And, creative writing, storytelling kind of, gives you a framework to go through that. So we work with authors to do that. I do tell everybody that we don't want to get into publishing celebrity works, because the key thing for me here is to try and normalize it. And for that, they need to be relatable stories of everyday people, the challenges that we have in society. So our focus, is very much the 99% of the world rather than the 1% of the world that's dealing with different issues. So in that regard, so we're very niche in that respect. We respect people's rights to, they may not want, like myself, to write it as Grant Budge. They might want to write it under another name because, it's the first step for them. They want to feel comfortable. We have one author who's told his story, but he's written it in a fictional way. So every event that happens, 95% of it happened, but he's constructing a fictional story. So it's whatever the individual's comfortable with. So we do the fictional route or the non-fictional. And with that, we operate as a standard publishing company. Although, and I'll talk about this a bit more later on when we hopefully when we talk about ways of dealing with mental health, particularly in the mining industry. We've also developed a B2B program that we work with companies on, which we work with them kind of as an employee assistance program, but using again the creative writing template. And we work with people going through the process to help them.
So with the stories that these authors produce, where do they go? Do you produce books? Do you produce a magazine, a newsletter, or do the stories go into particular publications?
So on the stuff we're doing at the moment, which are effectively full novels, they're getting published. So we sell direct from ourselves. We're on Amazon, Waterstones, Foils. We're doing the usual hard slug as an independent publisher, trying to get people to actually put it in products in shops. Hopefully we'll have success there. And we're just in the process of converting them to ebooks. So when people write a novel with us, like I say, we're a traditional publishing company. We'll follow all the usual outlets to try and get the story out and promote it, as best we can. On the short story side of it, our hope is that we can get enough people who are willing to share those short stories that we can release them as collections of works. And ideally, I'd like those to be themed collections of works. So people have had similar experiences, but dealt with them in slightly different ways, such that, I'm going to say, so if somebody's suffering depression, you can go and get a collection of 20 short stories about people who have been in different environments but suffered depression and how they went about, going through that. So it becomes, informative, supportive, but back to that buzzword I used a minute ago, it normalizes it for the people who are suffering now, because we tend to still think that mental health isn't something that's normal, to a greater extent. And that's the real thing that needs to, I think that needs to change.
Why is there a problem with mental health in the mining industry, or even more directly, is there a problem that actually needs resolving? So,
it's a good question. Not just the mining sector, every company I talk with asks, is there really a problem? The challenge here is that this actually, because we've stigmatized mental health over so many years, and people perceive it as a weakness, nobody's really talked about it. So really good, credible statistics are hard to find. Although, there's certain countries, Australia's a good illustration, who have started to do some, more detailed studies specifically in the mining sector about challenges people are facing. But at a high level, globally, across everybody, about 1 in 4 people will suffer mental health challenge in a year.
One person out of 4?
Every 4 will have a mental health issue.
Every year?
Every year.
That's quite a large proportion of people that will experience or go through certain issues that is related to mental health, and whether they know it or not.
And that's an average. So, you've got the extremes around that, depending on what circumstances or environments people are working in, which is then kind of back to your point, what's the landscape in the mining sector? Now, we can't find any directly equivalent, ratio, because I say it's early days on quantifying these things. But there was a survey done in Australia a few years ago, I think about 4 years ago, and specifically in the mining side, asking the questions about who felt either mild or high stress or no stress against a bunch of criteria. And the criteria either work related, they were lifestyle related, or they were family related issues. And on the work-related, greater than 40% said they felt stressed of some sort. On the lifestyle, greater than 60%. And on the content, the family losses, which kind of really are a consequence of the other two, they were up at, I think it was 50%. So just by default, stress usually is the foundation of many mental health challenges. So they didn't ask the question, are you suffering mental health? But because on average, more than 50% across those three criteria were saying, yes, I'm feeling it, you can then say, okay, well, it's reasonable then to assume after that, someone close to 50% is probably struggling in some way with a mental health challenge. So it's pretty significant.
What are some of the signs that someone could be experiencing mental health issues? And I suppose if you can just tell us a little bit about some of those signs, and then also then relate it maybe to the mining industry, just so obviously those that are listening could be going through that particular issue, and if they are, they can obviously then at least now look to address it.
Yeah. So there's two ways of looking at that. There's the person who's suffering and acknowledging it themselves and what signs they should look for. And then there's other people looking at their community to see if they can identify people. And I'll deal with the latter first, because one issue is 9 times out of 10, you won't know that somebody's dealing with a mental health issue because they don't want to convey that message. They'll hide it. And when I came, put my hand up and said I'm suffering, all my friends and family around me were like, really? And I had one, reasonably good friend who actually read my book about a month ago. And when she finished it, she said, I had no idea, where you got to. And I said, well, that's okay. Nobody did. She said, yeah, but we sat across coffee tables from each other and I didn't have a clue. So the first point of call is when you're looking from the outside, usually people don't want to show how they're feeling. So it's really hard to see. He is showing signs, then, it'll be things like poor concentration, being easily distracted, unusually emotional potentially compared to how you know them before, feelings of feeling low without any particular explanation, excessive tiredness, struggling to make decisions. These are kind of all of the signs that you may be able to see. But in a work context, obviously, you need to have had experience with somebody for a while to be able to know the difference. So, if it's a new employee, you're flying blind. You might just think they're not a good new employee, which is bad. Yeah.
I was going to say, what were some of your signs then when you then decided, right, I have an issue? What were some of the signs that you were experiencing?
For me, all of the above. I was acknowledging myself, feelings of numbness, feelings of, just sitting down, wanting to go to sleep to pass the time. In my work, I was identifying that I was finding it harder to communicate effectively on some things. I'm going to change that. In my home life, it was getting harder to communicate, because the odd thing for me was, it's a bit like an interview, but every day becomes an interview. So when you go to work in the morning, you put on the facade and you are the person everybody's expecting you to be. So in a work environment, nobody was really seeing it. But then the counter to that is that was completely exhausting for me. So then when the end of the day came and I switched off, then it was like every day was just a crash. But I was seeing those things, certain home life, irritableness, that I couldn't explain, all the above in reality.
And what would you say? Obviously, you've been in the mining industry. What are some of the things that you think that people could be experiencing or going through within the mining industry, where you think that person could be starting the experience of having mental health issues and challenges? Obviously, you mentioned a few of the things that I suppose everyone that will be going through that process will experience. But if you relate it to the mining industry, is there certain examples that you could give where those that are listening, for instance, could be experiencing that within their work environment, and then and then obviously the people that are listening could then acknowledge that, and obviously then make necessary changes?
Yeah. I think for me, my experience in mining and working, underground in the UK, I always say the mining community is an odd or very different community with a lot of other industries. Because, when you work in a mine, you're not necessarily working alongside somebody, but there's up to 200 other people on that shift with you who are responsible for everybody's safety and how things perform. And it's very much the extremes of a team environment. But there's a lot of pressure that then comes with that in all those different jobs in that architecture that people take on board. And then when you lay over that, the very frequently hostile and dangerous environments that we're operating in, which, whether we acknowledge it or not, we freely walk into, the cage and ride down the shaft. And it becomes a way of life, but you never actually forget really the risks you're walking into every day, and they're always there. So that's another thing that builds up. And again, depending on where you are in the world, you've got unsocial shift patterns, which have consequential effects. You've got this fly in, fly out in a lot of locations, which adds another layer. So we accept all these things, I guess, in the work environment, because that's the industry we chose to go in. And I guess the harder thing is then acknowledging how they then have an impact on the things that we should be finding the fun out of in life, which is when we get to family, get to socializing, get to meeting friends. And we don't always see the stress points, that it pulls on that. It's like, I've had times when I've been not in the mining side, flying away and coming home at the weekends, and it put huge pressure on the weekend to be a good weekend. But by default, then, because you accepted the pressure, it wasn't a good weekend. It was, it went completely the opposite direction. So I think there's a lot of things inherently in a mining environment that bring those stresses that can push people to, I can say breaking point, but it's never one or the other for me. When I've talked to companies recently, it's always been a case of, look, you've got all these issues and concerns you need to have in the workplace. But what you've got to remember also is when that employee turns up in the morning, they haven't left the issues that they've got at home. And you can't expect them to. So at some point, you have to accept these come together, and they come together in your community. And that's what you need to be looking at to try and deal with.
Yeah. And I suppose, like any company, KPIs, where companies have individual KPIs or team KPIs, which then puts extra pressure on the team, the company, and always striving to be better than the previous month, the previous year, etc., which obviously creates stress. Would you say that could be a major factor as well, why someone could, I suppose the stress levels will go up? Because if you're behind the eight ball, you need to get in front of it, and obviously that takes a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, a lot of work. Could that then put you into that situation where all these other triggers could happen around mental health?
Yeah, possibly, but I don't want to fall foul of every other company out there and say KPIs aren't important.
No.
They're essential, and managing to them is important. But I think the important thing is how people manage to them. And some of the experience I've had in the mining industry, and they're a few years ago now, but historically there's always been very much a command and control mentality. It's that type of approach. There's not so much the softer side of working with people and driving a team. And I think that's where KPIs become something that they don't need to be. That's your target, hit your target or else type of mentality. That's where the stress comes in. If it's more proactive, look, that is the target, keep me appraised of how things are evolving, keep me appraised of something that means we're not going to meet it. And it's not a case of, if we're not going to meet it, it's your problem. If it's not going to meet it, we need to get together and figure out how we meet it. And it's that more proactive approach. So KPIs are good, they can bring stress, but it's more about I think how people manage the situation than anything else.
Yeah. Something else I just thought about, obviously the mining industry, they work long hours, and sometimes they are working 6 and 7 days a week, which is probably different to other industries. I mean, you probably would have experienced, you're probably working 10, 12-hour shifts, for instance. Other industries do that as well, but you might be in harsher conditions working in the mining industry, whether you're working remotely in really hot conditions, And there's obviously some mines in really cold conditions.
Yeah.
But the amount of hours, total amount of hours that you're doing is probably a lot more than a lot of other industries. Again, could that be a trigger? And how? And again, how would you help people with that?
So, I mean, it is, you're right. You can be working 6 days a week, 60 hours. And part of that falls back to this fly in, fly out mentality. When you have somebody in the workplace and there's not a lot else to do apart from work, then we have shift patterns that support that. And it does build up levels of exhaustion, which hopefully an employer is feeding into what their fly in, fly out shift patterns are looking like. So people get the right amount of a break. But it's also about employers providing the right resources for those off hours in whatever the environment is, give the opportunity for people to wind down, deconstruct, feel like they're part of a society, a community, make sure they're not feeling isolated. You know, it's giving them the right architecture for a social engagement or a release outside of the work. You know, some places, and again, I'm going back quite a few years, I've been mines that are really good at doing that. You know, where you've got your town that everybody's living in, but they've got the right resources. You go out and you feel like you've just gone home for the night, rather than you're just going back to a 1-bedroom apartment waiting for the next shift to start. So those are the types of things that certainly employers can focus on to help.
What are the issues with supporting people struggling with poor mental health?
I think there's two big things for me, and they come back to they start with communication, and then secondly trust, which then ultimately leads to culture. So the whole thing about this, you said earlier on, mining industry heavily male dominated. I think it's probably greater than 80% male dominated, and we're not the best at talking. So you have to have a system that allows people to communicate and feel like they can engage. But then to be able to do that, you need to know that when you disclose something to somebody, you can trust them enough to have the respect to support you in the way you need to be supported. So there's a journey that needs to take place there. And that will probably be very much a one-on-one type of journey. So employers should be looking at ways, how can we create that trust and demonstrate, and it is really demonstrating that we're taking this seriously, that we want people to come forward, that it's not going to be a detriment to them, that we want to understand and we want to find ways of supporting better. So that's one piece. But then on the back of it, for me, after you've done on that one-on-one, it's making sure that the community actually as a whole is moving forward, because it's not just a single journey. Like we were talking about, you've asked the questions, what triggers mental health challenges? Some of them are societal, they're the behaviors in the society, in the community, in the culture that's being fostered. So there's no point in having the one-on-one if you sort the person, you help the person out and they feel better, and you chuck them back in the same pot of piranhas effectively. And I'm giving an extreme illustration of that, So you have to start changing the environment that they go back into and educating and gradually just moving everybody up in the same journey.
Yeah. What can mining companies do? And I suppose you can't just say a mining company has to do this. It has to be people within the mining company. What kind of process or system or project, and obviously anyone that's listening could bring these up maybe with senior management, and it might be someone that's already going through that particular process. What have you seen that's worked well within organisations around the mental health issue? Is there a set process, a system that a company implements into their business around this? So for instance, and I'm thinking off the top of my head here, if someone is struggling through mental illness, or they believe that they have the start of it, they go and see a particular person in an organization, but everyone knows that person, if you've got issues, you go and see that particular person, and you will go through a particular schedule to minimize that. What have you seen in companies, would you say, that's worked well, which the mining industry could then adopt?
So, a lot of things companies do kind of fall under three pillars, which, health promotion, on-site support, and external support. And I've not seen illustrations explicit in the mining industry, but I would imagine they'll follow a similar sort of template. So from the health promotion side of it, that is the education, training of managers, even health assessments to keep a track on how people are. That again comes back to my point about trust and people feeling they can disclose things. You then got the on-site support, which you kind of talked about, which is having physical workplace policies, making sure that people understand them and are there supported, and putting in place. A lot of companies are doing mental health first aiders. So that's the person you're talking about, the right person you can go talk to who has some foundation and grounding in it. They can also look at ways, so if we've talked about how challenging the mining environment is. There are opportunities to find ways of restructuring some jobs to take away certain stress points. May not be forever, but it could be for a period of time to help a person, to get beyond where they are. So that type of job role accommodation can be a good thing. But then the big one is the external, and for that, everybody, the acronym of the past, 5-10 years has been EAP, Employee Assistance Programs. And that can be a mixed bag of a multitude of things. That's the access to counselors, psychologists at one end, through to, access this platform to get information on depression, or this platform to get information on eating disorders, or download this app and learn how to meditate, or just breathe, or find mindfulness, or track your well-being. And all these are good, in my opinion. But unfortunately, my view on a lot of it is it's going to be really politically incorrect. It's a bit like ESG criteria with some companies. It's ticking a box to say we've done it, to brand it, to say we've done it. So I've met it, I put something in place, let's see how that works out. It's not, for me, proactive enough. And I don't want to get into selling stuff, but what we're trying to do is very much be more on the front foot about it. When we'd go in and we run a program, and our program is very much focused around using that creative platform and short story writing for people to put all their thoughts in a structure, deal with their emotions, but then also at the end of it, through conclusion, start focusing on the future, what I want, from my future, not dwelling, continuing on the past, very much a self-help, self-awareness process. But so unlike a lot of the EAP stuff, we are saying, look, we want to be direct, we want to engage direct, we want to understand direct. And once we've done that, hopefully that's aided that individual. But then with that information, we repackage that, we profile the stories to be able to advise the company what the EAP program should look like if they've got gaps. We develop bespoke supervisory management training programs. So it's not just a mental health first aider who you go to. So there's a core competence to support people, by direct line management within the workplace. And then my last piece about communities, we then restructure them again based on what's going on currently in the environment, and create a suite of toolbox talks that the company then over a period of time can brief out to their workforce. So everybody's trying to move in the same direction, understanding the issues, and indeed how they may be contributing to those issues. So I think there are processes there, packages there. Are they working as well as could do? No. I mean, if you go back to the beginning, we said 25% people suffer a mental health challenge in a year. Last year, I think EAP usage was registered at about 11% on average of a workforce. So A, we've still got a huge gap before we get to the 25%. And B, they can't tell you how effective that 11% was. All they can tell you, it's a bit like a website. Somebody clicked on to have a look. You don't know what they got out of that experience and whether it was good, bad, or just did nothing. So, and that's why, again, I think, opening people up to being more direct, and hopefully with our model, pulling them into our community of people who have had exactly the same issues, can give them the confidence and the strength and the trust to be able to engage in that process.
Yeah. How do, obviously, listeners that are listening to this podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, how can they get in contact with you? And I don't mean just emailing you. I mean, what is the process if they're feeling some of these challenges? What is the process that they will go through if they wanted to sort of reach out to you?
So we work in two ways. I mean, I mentioned, the B2B service, that's direct with the company. So if we did that, we engage with the company, we set up in the company, we socialize the opportunity to enroll, and then there'll be a program set out and they go through the process there. And all of that we do on an anonymous basis, effectively. If that doesn't happen, then their company and they want to talk, well, we're open for submissions all the time. We are making accessible our program. So if an individual wants to sign up and do it in their own time and then submit at the end of it to us, they can do that. Or they can just, if they think they don't need the program, but they want to try just creative writing for their own sake and submit something, well, we're always open to submissions. And like every other company, get on the website, you'll find all the details that you need to there. But certainly in the work environment for mining companies, our big emphasis would be talking to if they've got a well-being officer, we're trying to engage with them, or if not them, then the HR directors, to try and get them to understand how we can help, not just improve things, but starting to quantitatively and qualitatively demonstrate how mental health can improve things. Because one of the things that people don't consider, and again, this isn't mining related, but in the UK, in 2022 in the UK, about 57% of lost working days were associated with a mental health issue, with a cost of UK revenues of about 45 billion. So when people talk about things like this, they may think, what's the payback? There's a very big tangible benefit by improving people's mental health and the communities that people exist within.
And as a conclusion, I just wondered if you could just tell us, I suppose the people that are listening to this podcast are in the mining industry. I just wonder if you can give us a bit of a conclusion that if someone that could be experiencing it, what they need to do themselves to address their issues. Like you said, not many of us males like to talk about this and may hide it. What advice can you give to people that may be in that sort of situation, that probably feels that things are not right, but they need fixing, but they don't know what to do? What kind of process can they go through? And I suppose that's a mind thing. What are the first steps that they could take?
So for me, the foundation to moving forward was about being able to effectively communicate. So if somebody feels they can just straight articulate how they're feeling, then find somebody, whether it's a friend, family member, somebody who can listen and doesn't engage in the process of trying to fix it, because it's not about fixing somebody. Yeah, but somebody you can actually explain things to, because just getting it out there inherently helps. It's when you're bottling the story up inside you that you struggle then to put it in place. So that is the most robust starting point. And if it's not a family member or a friend, if that's not working, you need actual support. Then reach out to one of the either the NHS, or in the UK we've got Mind or Young Minds. There's a lot of organizations out there who can help and give guidance and information, all on a pretty much an anonymous basis. Nobody knows. Do that, but don't feel that you're on your own and isolated. Keep if you're listening to this now, keep remembering we started this by saying 1 in 4 people have a challenge each year. It is normal. If you can find a place to accept that, then you can find a way to start moving forward. And also find, there's good coping mechanisms out there, and they're not unusual. Eat well, exercise, find a way to release, get outside. And every now and then, if you want to, lay on the floor and just breathe slowly, all help. They do. But I think you said right at the beginning, different things help different people. It's finding what's right for you, but being able to talk about it, communicate, that really is the best starting point you can make.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is there anything else that you want to say and concluding? But I think the last sentence there that you said about exercise, eating well, I suppose, and again, thinking about the mining industry, is taking time out of the industry, not just on your breaks, for instance, on your R&R brakes. Is there anything else that, as a conclusion, or anything else that you want to add?
No, not really, other than, you know, I do believe, you know, communicating is a good way. And if you're struggling to articulate it, then just consider, you know, what we're trying to do, you know, writing it down. It doesn't have to be with us, but it is a good way to actually help yourself move forward, and to understand and put in context, you know, where you've been.
Grant, really appreciate your time. It's a obviously important subject. Like you said, the mining industry is dominated by males. Us males don't like speaking about these kinds of issues, but hopefully you've given some confidence in people that could be experiencing some of these issues that you've mentioned through this podcast. If anyone wants to reach out to you, if they've got any questions, how can they go about doing that? What are you on social media, and what are those details?
Yeah, sure. So, God, you tasked me to remember all of them now.
I can put them in the show notes. You can send them to me if you can't remember them off the top of your head.
Well, the easiest one's the website, which is integrity-media.co.uk. But then a lot of our social media is branded around our trademark, which is rediscover, rebuild, relaunch. So, but I can send you those, and if you can include them, that's great. And then people can see the information we share, including when we're promoting books of people who have been through similar programs that might help.
Yeah, certainly. Like I said, really appreciate your time. And those that are listening, hope you enjoyed this episode. Please share it amongst, I suppose you don't even need to necessarily just show it, share it with people within the mining industry. It can be people outside of the mining industry as well. And if you are potentially experiencing any of the issues that obviously Grant's discussed, maybe you want to write some of it down. It might be easier. Please get in contact with Grant. Maybe writing could be the answer if you're not able to communicate and speak to someone. So yeah, have a think about it. If there is any issues, there's obviously always help out there. So don't be afraid to ask. Appreciate you for listening, and until next time, happy mining.